I'm Charles Long, Resident Director at the Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Center at Overton, Texas. This demonstration is being conducted by Mr. Ronnie Gooseberry of Crockett, Texas, and his blackmouth curs, assisted by Mr. Mark Curry, Texas AgriLife Extension Service County Extension Agent in Polk County. Mr. Gooseberry has been working cattle and raising and using blackmouth curs for 45 years. He is well known and respected for his knowledge and experience in this type of cattle handling.
There's no white cowboy.
Upon leaving the trailer at the working pens, Mr. Gooseberry keeps his dogs with him as he and Mr. Curry ride into the pasture. This pasture is open with good visibility and the cattle are in sight. He will send the dogs to the cattle when a little closer, but not so close as to have the cattle start to drift away from the riders. If the cattle are not in sight, perhaps because of wooded areas in the pasture, he would send the dogs to find them. Using a single quiet command, Mr. Gooseberry sent the dogs to gather the cattle. The dogs were waiting to get that word and eagerly run toward the cattle. They will circle and bark, causing the cattle to bunch up to form a herd. Notice that these cattle tend to quickly form a tight herd, which is typical of cattle that have been worked with dogs and are dog broke. If the cattle were not familiar with cow dogs, more time would be required to form the herd, but the results would be the same. Notice that the cattle readily come to the herd to avoid pressure from the dogs. Cattle, particularly cows with calves, will come to a herd from appreciable distances when they hear dogs baying the herd, even without the dogs finding and circling them. The bay up is the process in which the dogs circle and bay the herd. This gives the cows time to settle down and also allows any stragglers to come to and join the herd. Mr. Gooseberry will let the dogs bay the cattle until they are settled and content to remain in the herd, and the herd is remaining more or less stationary. This is quickly done with dog-broke cattle, but requires appreciable time with cattle that have not previously been worked with dogs. Notice that a cow will come out and challenge the dogs, but soon returns to the herd. With cattle seeing cow dogs for the first time, there will be much of this type activity, and at first the cows will be very persistent in their attempts to cause the dogs to leave. Also, if the cattle are wild, there will be a number of runaways, or at least attempted runaways. In some cases with first-time cattle, the bay-up may take an hour or more before cattle realize that by staying in the herd, they avoid dog pressure and can be fairly calm and settled. For this to occur, the dogs must behave as these dogs are doing. They stay out of the herd and exert a high level of pressure only on those cattle which attempt to leave the herd. When Mr. Gooseberry judges the cattle to be settled and ready to drive, he and Mr. Curry ride to the herd at a slow pace. They circle the herd and approach slowly from the side of the herd away from the direction of the pens so as to start the herd toward the pens. In the case of wild cattle, they may make a large circle so that the cattle don't see or smell them until they are in position behind the herd or away from the pens. In that case, if the cattle try to escape, they will be going toward the pens. If this occurs, the riders will allow the bay-up to continue a while longer to further settle the cattle. In order to begin movement of the herd toward the pens, the riders will put pressure on the rear of the herd. Notice that the dogs will orient themselves at the front of the herd on the side opposite the riders. A herd of cattle less gentle than these would require leaving the dogs at the front of the herd to slow the movement and prevent runaways. These cattle are very gentle and dog-broke, so Mr. Gooseberry made the dogs leave the herd to permit the cows to start toward the pens. In fact, he sent the dogs to water in a pond to the left of the screen. Only one dog stayed at the herd, and he was called behind the riders. In order to give our videographer an opportunity to get close-up video of the dogs at work, we added this intermediate bay-up. In a regular work situation, this would not be done. The drive would continue uninterrupted to the pens. Mr. Gooseby sent the dogs to stop the cattle and initiated the bay-up. Notice the movements of the dogs and the cattle and listen to the baying of the dogs. As the riders continue to drive to the pens, notice these cattle moving slowly without being unduly afraid. This is a routine activity for dog broke cattle. When approaching the pens, the riders move slowly and are very patient with the cattle, letting them move at a slow to moderate pace. The dogs are present to maintain the integrity of the herd and to prevent any scattering of cattle. As the herd enters the trap and in the pen, Mr. Gooseby keeps the dogs at the rear to handle any animal that may try to break back past the riders. As the cattle walk into the pen gate, the penning is successfully concluded.